In today's video, I'll be providing critique and drawing over artwork submitted by you. This will be an ongoing series, so if you want to be in the next one, you can fill out the Google form in the description. Please be sure to read the terms fully before submitting your work. The purpose of this is to help not only the artists who submitted their works, but also help anyone else who may be struggling with the same things. I will also not be improving every single detail of the drawing. The point of me painting over is to demonstrate what my advice will look like once applied, and I'll be focusing on what to me jumps out as the biggest things you could improve on. I will also ask you to please be respectful and kind in the comments. We are here to help each other. Also, small disclaimer, I don't want to see any annoying art has no rules comments, please. People submitted their art for me to review, so I will. And if you don't like my advice, you don't have to take it. Okay, on to the video. Our first submission comes from Caleb, who says that when it comes to improving his work, he doesn't particularly care about what art style you use to tweak it, and he's just here for it. I will still try to keep your style choices as intact as possible, because I do enjoy some of the choices here, especially the colors. The first thing I noticed was your usage of very thick lines. I also love using thick lines, but you must strike a balance between thick and thin lines. Since you use such thick lines everywhere, the details can get a bit cramped, like how in the head, the distance between the mouth and the chin is very small, and the forehead is also very small, presumably because there wasn't much space inside the circle you drew for the head. The first thing I'll do is change the construction of the head. Instead of drawing a circle, you can draw a rectangle and then define the jaw. The skull is a circle, but your head also includes the jaw, which extends down past the skull. Now, by measuring the distance between the eyes and the hairline, it seems that your character is facing slightly to our left, and because of that, a bit of the skull will be showing to our right. I'll be placing a guideline slightly to the left to make sure all the details of the face have the correct perspective. Think of boxes. When a box is turned away from you, you can see one wall more, and the other wall is not shown. Apply this logic to everything that is facing away from the viewer. The further away from us something is, the smaller it seems. You can see this principle with the hairline. One side barely shows the line going down the sideburns, while the other fully shows the sideburn. Going back to what I mentioned earlier, using such a large brush doesn't leave much space for details. So while I can tell these eyes are looking left while zoomed in, from very far it's a lot harder to tell. So I'll be showing a lot more of the eye whites to make sure there's more clarity in where he's looking. Now, onto the body. Usually shoulders extend about one width of the head. This can vary from character to character, but this character is very buff, so this measurement should work well. That being said though, you have to remember your character is in perspective. Remember our bots? We want one arm slightly smaller since it's facing away from us. It looks like the body is facing the opposite direction of the head, so the right arm will be slightly smaller. I also noticed the arms are a bit short. The hands usually reach a bit past the crotch area, and the elbows are around the hip area. So even though his arm is bent, so everything would go up a bit, it still looks a bit short to me, so I'm gonna make these arms longer. Speaking of arms, buff arms are deceptively straight. Muscular people with low body fat will have very bumpy arms, but for the most part, on people with higher body fats, most of the bumpiness is inside the lines. So I'm gonna add some shadow inside the lines to indicate the musculature. You did a pretty good job in not making the arms too bumpy. So I'm only really gonna straighten the connection between the triceps and the elbow, since it's a bit hard to see that muscle defined while the arm is bent. Onto the torso, this character has a pretty small waist, but also some wrinkles around the shirt. Wrinkles form when fabric is loose or being pulled. We call these points of tension. If we can see this character's waist so defined, the shirt is probably very tight. So I'm gonna get rid of these wrinkles. This looks like a compression shirt to me, so when wearing those, you only really get wrinkles at the bottom of the shirt when doing some movement like bending over, which creates tension points, or if you have a big chest. So I'm gonna do a shadow to define this character's chest, and measure where the pecs will be by using the armpit as guidelines, and adjust the body accordingly. Make sure to look at anatomical models when drawing body parts, and try to use different parts of measurement, like how the corners of the mouth align with the iris, the bottom of the ears align with the nose, and in this case, the pecs connect with the armpits, but end slightly below them. I also widen the waist a bit because I personally like subtlety, because I feel like it tells my viewers that I trust them. I trust that you'll understand this character's waist is small without me exaggerating the proportions. There's nothing wrong with exaggerating, I'm a One Piece fan after all, but I feel like pushing your shapes works best when everything else is normal in comparison. I also fixed the crotch area. The really thick lines made it a bit confusing, and the strings having no outline also doesn't help with the clarity of the image. So I made the wrinkles of the sweatpants thinner and outlined the strings. A general rule is to use thick lines for the outside of an object and thin lines for the details inside the object. Hands are difficult, but some general tips are to emit in a square with rectangles coming out of them, or french fries. I don't know where I learned the french fry thing, but it's honestly so helpful. So the palm would be like the little carton that they come in, and the fingers would be the french fries. This is just another way of breaking things down or simplifying them, which I talk about in my Draw Anything video. You should check that out. Also, the hands are roughly the same size of your character's face, not head, face. And following my advice about line art, I made the outside of the jewelry black. I like colored line art, but if it sacrifices clarity, you should approach it differently. And that brings me to my final piece of advice for this drawing: clarity. There's parts of this drawing that are a bit unclear, so I've had to assume things based upon context clues. I mentioned earlier that you should trust your viewers, but you also have to give them the necessary tools to come to the correct assumptions. Like earlier, I assumed this character has a compression shirt on because of how defined his waist was, but maybe you were intending to draw a normal loose shirt. And with this necklace, I'm assuming because of the aesthetic of this character that it is a chain, but from afar and out of context, it can be interpreted as a pearl necklace, so you must make it clearer. And I did so by doing a more traditional chain pattern with higher contrast. You could use a chain brush for this, but if your program doesn't have it, you can just do it manually, and here I am doing just that. And with the neck, I'm not sure if he's wearing a turtleneck or if it's a shadow. I assume he has a beard because the lines wiggle around his chin, but I don't know if it's a small chin beard or one of those really thick ones. You know what you're drawing because you're drawing it, but your viewers have to reverse engineer your thought process with the art you made. So for now, I'm interpreting this as a neck and making that clearer. If you meant to signify something else, adding more details will help your viewers see it as you intended. But yeah, here's my before and after of Caleb's drawing. I like your color choices, which is why I didn't change them. You have some understanding of perspective, I can tell by how the logos curve around the shirt, and I like your style choices, which is why he doesn't have a nose in my version too. So my advice to Caleb summarize is practice perspective. You can do box exercises or play around with 3D models and see how things look when positioned differently. Thinner lines for details. I go as far as to say you should start with thinner lines and then use thicker lines to outline the figure and other objects you'd like to emphasize or separate, which is going to be a way for you to increase clarity. You want to make sure that everyone understands exactly what you're drawing. A good way to make sure of this is to look at your piece zoomed out to see if you can still clearly understand most of what's happening. I hope this helped, and you're free to show me how your art looks like if you decide to follow my tips. And if you're comfortable with it, I could show your art in my next video to see what it looks like after you apply my tips. And this goes for anybody that's featured in the series. Alright, now on to Smecka's submission. Smecka says that they feel like they can't do backgrounds, they don't have perfect anatomy, and the colors feel off. Also, I apologize in advance if I misgendered any of these characters. This piece is very cute, I like the storytelling. What immediately jumped out to me is that there's a lot of airbrush going on, so I'm going to make a lot of harder shadows. Things like stairs will have very different values going on, and they're usually going to be very sharp. There's also these two characters that will create harsh cast shadows. A lot of this illustration is full of midtones, and it creates kind of like a dull look. A scene that takes place in nighttime with a very bright light should have higher contrast. So I'm gonna make the lights brighter. Keeping in mind where the light is coming from, I'm gonna place some highlights where I think it would hit. Also keep in mind that there are objects in the way that will block some of the light, like clothes, wrinkles in the clothes, hair, the character's head, etc. I'm gonna blur some of these edges, but not too much. Keep in mind this principle. The closer an object is to another, the darker and harder the shadows will be. When it's further away, the light will be lighter and blurrier. But this also happens when an object is close to a light. The highlights get brighter and the shadows get darker and harder. As you go away from a light, everything gets closer to a mid-tone, and the shadows get softer or blurrier. But then you also have to keep in mind that there's soft lights, hard lights, direct lights, bounce lights. It's a lot, I know. And I think that is the main issue with this piece. You have a concept that is very complicated. There's a lot of things to think about with the lights and the perspective. It's hard to keep track of everything. Not to mention, it's a nighttime scene, which are notoriously difficult to paint as you have significantly less values to work with. Which creates issues like this, where the values blend into each other. This character's hair has a very similar value to the stairs right next to him, which makes it harder to tell where his hair ends and the stairs begin. You tried to remedy this by adding these harder bounce lights, but where is this light coming from, and why is it as bright as the highlights from the brightest light source in this piece? I'm gonna add a cast shadow and make his shoulder darker to really separate him from the background. You added some blue reflection lights, and assuming these are from the sky, but if they were, this light will be coming from behind and above. Or maybe they're coming from the side of these rails here, but then you have to consider the light would be in a stripe shape because they're coming through the rails, adding yet another layer of complexity. It's fine though, your art piece doesn't have to make perfect sense. It can bend reality a bit to serve the purpose of clarity. So I will be using this blue shade that you applied here. That being said though, you put it inside both of these leaves, which imply the light is coming from both directions. So to fix this, I'm just gonna do blue lights coming from the right and the green light coming from the left. The hands have a few issues. There's light coming from what seems to be inside the sleeve. I probably meant it to be the hand kind of flopping down, but I don't think that position would generate that much light, because remember, there's multiple objects blocking the main light source from this far. The distance by itself will already significantly reduce the light that's coming from the light source, but there's also this other warm character in the way, and this character's clothes. I added a teensy bit of light on this right hand to indicate that it is flopping down, but not that much. I basically made everything in mid-tone. I added the blue bounce light and then added the green light, but with a very low intensity because of all the factors previously mentioned. When shading, you usually want to pick areas of interest, but also you need to pick where do you want most of your details to be, in the shadows or the highlights. This piece is already so detailed that the answer for this one would be a bit of both, but I'm gonna try and focus on the highlighted areas since that's where our eyes are naturally drawn to. So I'm gonna make his hair a bit more detailed. Now to separate this character from the background, I'm gonna add a cast shadow behind this character, sort of right behind them. Having a light source this close to everything in this drawing makes for a very difficult puzzle to figure out, because unlike doing the typical one direction, far away, natural lighting that everybody does, like the sun for example, this light creates sort of a radius where the light revolves around it, and so the shadows will have to revolve around it too. And then you add on top of that the blue light that seems to be coming from the right and also from behind and maybe from above, and there seems to be some kind of white light coming from the left. It's too much. Multiple light sources cast shadows like this. That's probably not going to look very appealing in your drawing, so we don't have to do that, but just keep in mind multiple light sources look like this, which is usually why we work with two, and we usually make those light sources off screen. Now for this character's hair and face, it seems you got the shading backwards. The top of the hair will receive the most light since it's closest to the light source, whilst the bottom of the hair would have the hard shadow. Remember my hand video? This is what's happening to the hair. This character's face is kind of flat, so I'm gonna evenly light it and have some cast shadows from the hair on the forehead. I don't think this way of lighting it is fully accurate either, but it helps with driving the focus point. And hair is semi-permeable, so I think a little bit of light behind the hair is possible, looks nice, and helps with clarity by separating the shoulders from the hair. I'm gonna add a dark outline around this character to further separate them from the background, and speaking of shoulders, they feel a bit disjointed. This character seems very relaxed, so it makes sense their shoulders are sloped down, but it looks anatomically incorrect to me. So I'm gonna try and keep the general shape while making it more anatomically correct. The neck is a bit thin here too, but I'm sure that's a style choice. So I would instead make the shoulders smaller instead of making the neck bigger, but using liquify to do that would ruin a lot of the drawing, so I won't use it here. But keep it in mind for your next drawing. The neck should look like it can support the head, and this neck looks a bit small compared to the shoulders, even considering it may be a style choice. The torso also looks a bit too small, so I made it bigger. I also fixed the hands. Remember, the hands are going to block some of the light that's coming from above. The light on these knees are correctly placed, but too bright. The light down here wouldn't be as bright as the light on the arms and sleeves, so make it darker. And now I'm doing some finishing touches, keeping in mind everything I've taught you. I added more dark outlines to separate the characters from the background. I added more of those blue bounce lights. I added a bit of smoke for funsies, and now it's time for some post-processing to really push this piece. I like the more desaturated colors, but to really make this piece pop, I'm gonna saturate the areas closest to the light and add an overlay layer in light green to make it brighter. And then another overlay layer, I'm gonna use an airbrush in black in the surrounding areas, basically anywhere that's furthest away from the light. I prefer overlay instead of multiply for adding black, since it feels more reactive to tones. And that's it! My version isn't perfect because your concept was too complex. There's many light sources, there's perspective going on with the stairs, there's tons of details. It's okay to have complicated, ambitious ideas, even if you don't know how to execute them. Make it exist now, because you can always improve it later. But when you have an ambitious idea like this one, it's good practice to properly plan it beforehand to avoid all the issues I noticed in this piece. Create a mood board with similar images and references beforehand, and make sure that you are prepared to make your idea a reality. I also suggest that you study lights and shadows. I explained some of the principles of lights and shadows here, and I'll make a future video about it. This piece is good and it shows an understanding of shadows, but again, when you amp up the complexity as high as you did for this piece, it becomes a lot more difficult to properly shade your scene. And finally, I think you need higher contrast and harder shadows. A good exercise for this is to draw with 2 or 3 values. Use a hard brush, find a good reference image, and try to break it down into 2 or 3 values. I love the airbrush, but you need a balance of hard and light shadows to properly convey form, texture, and depth. And that's it for now. Remember, the Google form is in the description if you want to be in the next video. Thank you so much to Caleb and Smecka for trusting me in submitting their pieces. I loved working on them, and I hope that both of you and everybody watching got some value out of my advice. This is the most involved video I had to make yet, so if you enjoyed it, please like it, subscribe, comment something, all of that stuff. Okay, see you guys next time.